If you've made it to the end of Netflix's Pluto, then you probably have more than a few questions. I'm here to answer them. Pluto came at the best time ever. I feel like we've opened up a whole Pandora's box of questions about the future, especially relevant in this day and age as AI like ChatGPT, among other tools, is finally in the hands of the average man. Imagine where we'll be in 20 years. Will we face the same scenes as shown in Pluto? If AI becomes sentient and robots become integrated, active members of the society, how should they be treated? Pluto takes this concept and runs with it. Naoki Urasawa, the legendary author behind Monster, decided to put a dark spin on the Astro Boy series and created the manga Pluto. It captured the heart of Maruyama, the producer of Pluto, who, by the way, is the original founder of MAPPA. He so badly wanted to do the story justice, he spent the past 10 years working on Pluto. The 80-year-old has previously stated that this adaptation is one that he strives to complete before his death. Well, I'm sure glad he did it. The anime came out recently, but the manga has been around for a couple of decades, and like many of you must have already noticed, he doesn't shy away from drawing parallels with what was happening in the real world, which is what makes the adaptation so thought-provoking. For example, the 39th Central Asian conflict parallels the American invasion of Iraq in the Middle East, though not a fictional retelling of the actual events. It's time to answer the big questions you have after watching the anime. Who exactly started the war? The initial premise is that the war started because of Darius XIV. For those who don't know, Darius is based on a Persian king, and while Iran and Iraq today are separate countries, there was a time period when Iraq was a part of the Persian Empire, which of course is now modern-day Iran. But was it really Darius who triggered the war? Or was it the United States of Thracia, a not very subtle representation of the US in the story? Well, as it is ultimately revealed, the true mastermind behind the 39th Central Asian conflict was actually just a teddy bear. The name is Dr. Roosevelt, and the character isn't revealed until the end. Even then, Teddy is still a mystery. The anime ends without explaining everything clearly. Well, at least in the manga, Teddy was revealed much earlier as Dr. Roosevelt. In fact, chapter 14 of the manga. Now, this Teddy is an AI supercomputer, the supercomputer of Thracia, that's been counseling the president. And as it eventually turns out, it masterminded the whole thing. Why? For one goal, and that was to make itself the one true superpower in the world. The supercomputer orchestrated a war for the same reason as a human would. This further conveys the author's philosophical stand. Where would you draw the line between humans and robots? The Bora fact-finding mission, which by the way is an intentional reference to the fact-finding missions that the United Nations actually carry out, was planned by Teddy to trigger the war. So what's Bora? The Bora project was initially King Darius's plan to vitalize the country's vast deserts, making them green and lush. He tasked Dr. Ebola to create a giant robot that can do exactly this. It was never meant to be a weapon of mass destruction. Dr. Ebola tried to build Bora, but he couldn't make it work, and ended up leaving piles of failed prototypes behind in some cellar, which was found by the fact-finding mission team. With some manipulation from Teddy, this was more than enough to support Thracia's claims that Persia was creating an army of robots for war, thus sparking the 39th Central Asian conflict. It was all according to plan because does it even matter if there's actually a robot of mass destruction or not? Yep, Dr. Ebola was merely used as a pawn by Teddy. In the war, he also lost his family, which starts the cycle of hatred, a huge theme in the story. But that's not the only thing he loses. Plot twist. He also loses himself, literally. In order to fulfill his task of creating Bora, Ebola recruits Dr. Tenma, the world's most genius man in the field of AI, to help build it. They eventually did manage to create the perfect AI robot, but it was unable to wake up as it was struggling to pick between the 9.9 million personalities entered into its system. With the help of another genius scientist named Goji, Bora was finally created. Now that's what we were told in the modern-day storyline. Let's backtrack to the events of the war. Turns out, Ebola was left full of rage and sorrow after losing his family in the war. Not long after their death, he died too. His dying wish was that Dr. Tenma place his downloaded memory chip into the perfect AI robot they'd created together. The chip was installed. The perfect AI robot awakens as Goji. He was so advanced and human-like that he could lie even to himself. That's exactly what he did, and began living as Ebola without knowing he's actually a robot. Goji and Ebola are one of the same. He then creates Bora as Goji, who is pretending to be Ebola. Bit of an inception there. And speaking of mind benders, why was Gazit's memory erased? The whole series leads up to the last 2 episodes where we finally find out the missing pieces in the detective's head. Years ago, Gazit had committed the unthinkable as a robot. He killed a human. Him and his wife had adopted a sweet little robot son. Their son was kidnapped and smashed to pieces by a robot-hating human and caught in the act. Gazit learns hatred for the first time and destroys the kidnapper. This act was hidden from him by his creators, who wiped his memories to protect him from the guilt as they were scared what this could mean for one of the most powerful robots in history to learn this emotion, which could be lethal. Just look at how Teddy is ultimately killed. Brow, the Blue Knight, is the only other robot who has killed a human. He hated humans, which is why, when Teddy sees him, he is also under the impression that Brow can help him take over the world. However, what Teddy failed to anticipate was the concept of empathy. When Brow connects with the newly revived Adam on an emotional level, and they open up, he feels something that can best be described with a sentence that goes like this: Brow feels human. And since Teddy was under the impression that Brow would take his side, Brow catches Teddy off guard and kills it using the spear in his chest. That's right, Teddy was able to orchestrate all of it, but he was unable to foresee the idea that Brow, a robot, could change heart. Humanity is synonymous with empathy. Throughout the story, they keep bringing up the blurred lines between humans and robots. Is it really the humans who are more humane, or the robots? It's a multi-layered narrative that keeps dancing between the line of justified and unjustified darkness. Even though the characters in the anime are mostly robots, we see how they process their grief, how they have their doubts about the war, its purpose, and why it happened in the first place. Take Pluto's Epsilon, for example. He refused to fight in the war because of his own moral compass. He was a pacifist who wanted no part in the war, though of course he was reprimanded for not being a killing machine in it. But we're shown in the soft human side of a robot's sense of ethical judgment and his gentle side of being a loving foster father to all those orphaned war children, much more humane than the actual human characters we see in the show, like that commander. In the original Astro Boy manga, this story arc was just 2 episodes long, but Naoki Urasawa was able to make something truly phenomenal out of it with so many important themes. It shows us the consequences of war and how it can permanently devastate a country, the geopolitical repercussions, and the idea that the natives never forget. Pluto sends a strong anti-war message, while reminding audiences of suffering on both sides where the only remaining answer is peace. A never-ending cycle of hatred is at Pluto's core, which gets reflected through individual characters as well as throughout the story. Personally, I think Teddy symbolizes greed, Gazit symbolizes hatred, Pluto represents redemption, and Adam, forgiveness. We see how Adam in the end confronts the hatred installed in him and refuses to let it corrupt him, forgiving Pluto for what's been done and basically saves the world.